Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar today, CARES Act Funding for K-12 Education, How Funds Can Be Used to Support Struggling Students. My name is Kira Herrikel, and I'm a member of the Texthelp marketing team, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We have a great presentation lined up today, but before we get started, I just wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping items with you. Today's session is in listen-only mode, but we'd love to hear from you and answer your questions if you have any. So throughout the session, feel free to type in the questions or chat box of the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll be monitoring those throughout the session, and we'll have a couple of opportunities to address those questions with the presenters. And I'll also do my best to reply to the others directly in the chat box as we go through the webinar. So feel free to test out the chat box now, say hello, or let us know where you're joining from today. Also, I wanted to let you know that the webinar today will be recorded, so you'll receive a follow-up email within the next couple of days with a link to the recording, as well as some additional resources. And if you'd like a copy of the slides to follow along with the presentation or take some notes, I'm going to share a link in the GoToWebinar chat box in just a minute so you can follow along with those, or you can type in your URL now, the URL that's displayed on the screen, which is text.help/th-cares, and this is case sensitive, so just make sure to capitalize that. So let's go ahead and get the session started. I'd like to introduce you all to Jason Carroll, who is the Director of Product Management here at Texthelp. Jason oversees the updates and releases to all of Texthelp literacy and STEM solutions. And prior to Texthelp, Jason was an education technology consultant in the state of Kentucky for nearly a decade. Our second presenter today is Jody Burr, who is Texthelp's Southeast Territory Director, partnering with educators in the states of Alabama, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. A recently retired inclusion educator and assistive technology facilitator, Jody is passionate about accessibility for all learners, so you're in great hands today. And without further delay, I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Jody.
Thank you, Kira. Does everyone hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay, excellent. So today we're going to start with a bit of a roadmap, if you will, following us through several different key points that we're going to be discussing. I'm going to start by sharing with you information about the CARES Act itself specifically. And we're going to take that information and divide it really kind of into three main overarching concepts and ideas that relate to the purposes and intent of the funding. And then Jason's going to take over a little bit and interject and share with us some of the assistive technologies and education technologies that we're going to be discussing today that align to the CARES Act funding and give us ways that we can help students throughout this process as we move forward into planning for the 2021 school year moving forward. And we'll wrap up at the end with a questions and answers time for us to discuss some of the questions that might have come in. And we're super excited to get started. So here we go. So let's take a little bit of a glance, sort of a bird's eye view of the CARES Act funding as it relates to the federal offering of these funds in response to our COVID crisis that, of course, we all know we've just experienced and are still coming through. So late March of this year, the federal government put together a package of almost $2 trillion or over $2 trillion, the Coronavirus Aid Relief Economic Security Act, excuse me. So that's where the CARES synonym comes from. And in that, separate funds were sent out to different department agencies, and the Department of Education was given nearly $31 billion for their Education Stabilization Fund. And that $31 billion was divided among several different departments that fall under the Department of Education. Primarily, these two sets of funds have gone to, we know, K-12 and then also higher ed. We've got about $13 billion that went into the elementary and secondary education reserve fund for K-12, and then we have $14 billion that went into higher ed. We're going to focus today's webinar on supports for K-12, as you know from the title and also the description of our webinar. There's also a 1% of that fund that went to states that were highly affected by or had a greater number of cases and saw more of a hit, if you will, with the COVID crisis itself, and so that's where that other 1% went to equate. And then there's also a separate reserve of funds that goes specifically to the governors, where they get to, through education, release some emergency funds that they have some control over, and that's that $3 billion that you see bulleted there. And then finally, there are some discretionary grants that states or the outlying areas, such as the Virgin Islands and Guam, and some of those outlying areas outside of the continental U.S. receive funding for there in those formula grants. The distribution of the funds was based upon the standard distribution of funds that states receive annually, and that's through the title funding formulas. And in that, the federal government expected an equitable distribution, not just to the public schools, but also to non-public schools. So there's some specific directions for how states are to also offer these funds and make these funds available to private schools, charter schools, and the like. In the funding direction that was put out, there's a lot of flexibility in how the funds are to be spent. We're going to explore here in just a moment 12 key points and guidance pieces that the federal department has put out for the funding, but there's a lot of flexibility in how districts and states can spend this money related to the 12 key points. But the main thing to note here is that this funding, even though it's based upon the title formulas, and that's how the money was distributed for the states, it's not just for title schools. So again, equity is super important and is emphasized all throughout the legislation that was put together here for this funding. And so in this, here's the 12 full set of allowable activities that the federal U.S. Department of Education put out to states when they apply for the funds. There is an application process. The federal government distributes that money back to the states within 3 days of them doing their applications. So many of the states across the U.S. Have already received their funds and are already making decisions within their states about how they're going to guide their districts in making application for these funds. But nonetheless, here we see the 12 allowable activities that are listed specifically for K-12 funding. And the pink boxes that you see all are around education technology, assistive technology pieces that parallel directly with the technologies that Jason's going to show you today that we offer here at Texthelp that can be a support to the purposes of this funding, again, moving forward. We're going to look at these a little bit closer as we look next at, Jason, if you want to go ahead and flip forward for me. Our sort of take on how we're going to divide this up today and how we're going to look at these funding pieces, because there's really 3 overarching ideas for the funding purposes, and the guidance really relates to 3 main themes. The first main theme is really a central idea across our systems that unite a district mission that relates to the new challenges of our current education environment and circumstances. And so that's our systems approach. How are we going to take a look at, in planning for these funds, use of these funds, how are we going to take a system approach to this, together making planning ideas and mindsets, following with a narrowing, so to speak, into the instructional processes of what we put out for our learner experiences, how we expect students to practice that work, and the assessment for the learning that occurs outside of school for that remote learning. Because we know and we hear across the country that some are providing, planning for face-to-face, others are providing for remote learning, others are providing for a hybrid approach. It really varies across the country, across the states, and of course across the districts. And then we narrow into a centralized focus on our diverse learners. And so the concept here is using this systematic approach coupled with what we're putting together for our remote learning. How are we prioritizing offering supports and tools for a multitude of our unique learners? And so each one of these pieces, as you see here with our little text helpers in the center, linking these pieces together, really are overlapping and overarching and really align with one another as your districts are working together to make decisions about how we're going to plan for what we're going to do with remote learning, what supports we're going to put into place, and how we're going to approach this as a system. Okay, Jason? And so now looking more specifically into the language in the guidance that we looked at previously, I know you saw those 12 steps there. That was pretty wordy. And if you notice, I didn't take the time to read over all of them, but I've pulled out here some specific pieces that relate directly to, again, that systems approach that we discussed, the remote learning and the diverse learners. As we go through the webinar, the duration of the webinar, and Jason jumps in and starts showing us the great things about the tools that we're going to be exploring, I'm going to go back and reference a little bit, sort of a review, if you will, of each of these. But just as a quick recap before we jump to that, our systems approach, again, is our policies and procedures and what we put together as our mindset as our district about what's important to us and how we're planning for that long-term closure, followed by the remote learning offerings, and we'll talk more specifically about that as we dive in. And then, of course, our diverse learners. I want to point out here under diverse learners some specific populations that were named in the guidance. Of course, we have our Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. We have our, which is, of course, we know our students with IEPs. This also includes our students with 504 plans, IAPs. We have our Carl Perkins learners, the homeless students that we serve in our populations, and then again, just a general address, and these are sort of a blend of each of these 12 guidance points, but an address here for the needs of individual schools, unique needs of our low-income students, students with disabilities. Again, there's our IDEA students, our English learners or our limited English proficiency students, and then our racial and ethnic minorities, as well as our foster care youth that we serve in our schools. And so with no further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and look a little bit closer about the exciting part of this. Now that we've kind of got the funding history and all of those ideas together, let's take a look at the systems approach. As we take a look at the systems approach, I want to mention to you that the funding that was put out, as I told you, the federal department, or the U.S. Department of Education pushed the funds to the states. The states then are pushing it to the districts. The districts actually have all the way through 2022, September of 22, to expend these funds. So that's important to know, because this isn't an idea of let's go in and purchase one tool and let's try it out and then let's move away from it. It needs to be a plan for a longer implementation. And again, that systems approach of how we're going to really look at our district's mission and our mindset of how we're going to approach each of these pieces of learning. And so with no further ado, Jason, are you ready to share with us some of the cool things that you have for us today that are
I
going
am.
to...
Do you hear me okay, I assume?
We do. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jody. Right. So just picking up where Jody left off, I'll start off by saying, and I think Kira mentioned it as well, you're going to get copies of these slides. There's going to be a recording. Rarely do I go through all of our different software in one short webinar time frame there. So I'll be going through some of these kind of fast. But on this systems approach, it's important. This very first thing I want to do is just give you a really quick couple of slide overview of each of the programs that I'll eventually be demoing here. But the reason the system approach is so important is when I ask questions, so Texthelp, we have offices in the US, we have offices in the UK, offices in Australia, we support people in countries all around the world. And one thing that is very common when I ask about how is the COVID-19 impacting you and those sort of things, and it's really uncertainty. No one knows exactly when we're going to go back to school, and no one seems to know if, well, we're going to start this day, and are we going to are we going to be in class every day, or are we going to be in class every other day, or are we going to go for a month, take off for a month? And the answer is no one knows, and we won't know until the data comes in. So with this system approach, it's really important to think, well, okay, if half of our year is going to be remote instruction, how are we going to deliver supports to students with disabilities? And it needs to be something that they can use inside the classroom when we're all together. It also needs to be something that will support them when they're at home. Similar thing goes for math instruction. How can we make math instruction engaging, but then be it at a point to where if we're not in school for a couple of days, how do we get away from the worksheets that I know are still so popular in so many math classrooms? Same way, how do we assess reading fluency? There are ways that we assess reading fluency. There are ways that we've been doing that for a long time. It gets really difficult to help a kid read whenever they are not in the classroom and they're at home somewhere. So those are the kind of things when we're thinking about system approaches. It's really preparing for being at school, things you can use in the school system and things you can use in remote scenarios. So jumping right into that, I'm going to start with read and write. And read and write, if you're not familiar with it, it is basically our literacy support toolbar. So in one toolbar, it's going to contain things to help with reading and writing and research and general productivity. There's text to speech that will read text out loud for you. There are word prediction. If you struggle with writing, there's grammar supports for when you're writing. Also productivity things that you can use as well. If you're on the web and doing research, you can highlight critical ideas or main ideas and supporting ideas, and then you can collect those and get those in a nice Google Doc and get the source where you got them from. There's dictation supports, visual supports, a lot of things, even translation supports that are built into one toolbar, and that toolbar just easily plugs into Google Chrome. The version I have here at the moment that you see on the screen at the bottom, that toolbar is just a Chrome extension. So if you use the Chrome web browser, you're going to be good to go. If you switch over to Windows and Mac, well, obviously you can still use that inside of the browser, but there's also a Windows program, and there's a version for iPad, there's a version for Android, a version for Mac. The Chrome extension obviously is going to work on Chromebooks. So the idea here is you have this one literacy support tool that's really going to help with your diverse learners, but it's going to help them in school and also in any remote scenario they may find themselves in. This other screenshot that you see at the bottom, that's actually of the Windows version that's above Microsoft Word. It shows how it just kind of sits on top of the toolbar there. And here we're listing some of the things that that read and write can do, and it really is. There really are a lot of supports built in, and you can simplify it. You can reduce the number of tools, expand the number of tools, but the text-to-speech, dictation, the spell checker, screen masking, graphic organizer tool, these things jokingly put time travel on at the end because there really are a lot of supports that's built into one. So that's read and write. That's going to really come in handy for a lot of scenarios. When Jody was talking about the diverse learner set, she mentioned all the different students that are impacted and fall under that, from ELL to disability to students that are just struggling, don't have the support at home. Read and write is a great tool for those. And I'll get into some specifics on it later and show a bit about how it works. Past that is Equatio. So a really difficult thing to do, that's always been difficult to do, is to create digital math. And that is why we often use paper and pencil and worksheets. And you get a room full or a school full of Chromebooks and you go into the math classroom and you still have to put your Chromebook away and get out your paper and pencil. It's because showing your work and working through problems has always been really difficult to do. Well, Equatio is meant to help with that. Equatio is an easy to use math and STEM tool. So with some of the recent stuff we put in, you can get into chemistry, we've got a periodic table, scientific calculators, working on a molecular viewer that goes in with it. But it's really just an easy way to create math and STEM related content. No programming languages or difficult palette-based editors are involved in that. And I'll show some of this here in a bit, but it's important to know that it's built on universal design for learning principles. So when we come into helping some of those students with diverse needs, there's a lot of pieces that are built in on the accessibility side of things, as well as just making it easier to use. And then also kind of nice, as I just talked about read and write, it integrates really well with read and write. So if you go and create math, well, then it's easy to turn around and use tools like read and write to have that read aloud and those sort of things. So that's Equatio. A few ways when I mentioned universal design for learning and being able to kind of the multiple means of representation and expression and those sort of things. Creating math, as I mentioned, it's not the most straightforward thing to do if you're trying to do that with technology, but with Equatio, you can easily create math with your voice. So here you can see on the animated GIF or GIF, depending on how you pronounce it, you can see the person is just speaking 2 + 2 = 4, and you can obviously do things much more advanced than that. But just speaking those, it shows up in the editor and you can insert it right into a Google document or also a Word document as well. We also have prediction. So I think most of us use prediction every day. If you use text message, you probably see prediction pop up when you're trying to send messages. We have the same thing for prediction for math. If you start to type the word square, for example, type SQ, you'll see squared, square root, an actual square. All these things will pop up so that you can just easily click and choose that to create your math. And we also even have handwriting recognition. So if you're wanting to be able to show your work, you can handwrite. So if you have, actually, there's several different ways you can do it. We even have a mobile application. But if you want to use handwriting, you can do that. If you have a Chromebook that has a stylus with it, for example, you can do that as well. It'll recognize that math and allow you then to pop that right into a Google Doc or a form or a Google slide. So lots of different ways that that you can actually create digital math. And then it works in a lot of areas, obviously in Docs and Word. The example here is in forms. We work in slides, several LMSs, so there's a lot of different places that Equatio works at. But it is all about creating that digital math, which is nice from an engagement perspective, but it's also really nice if you think that remote learning as well. How am I going to create math, share that with students, get them to turn it back in, show their work, all those sort of things. So that's the basics on Equatio. Fluency Tutor, and again, I'm going to get into more detail about these things later. Fluency Tutor is basically the idea behind it is how are we going to help students with oral reading fluency? How are we going to help them build fluency when they're in the classroom or when they're away from the classroom? And I've just got some real basic stuff here, but again, I'll show more later. The idea behind Fluency Tutor is there are a lot of passages that come with Fluency Tutor, reading passages. You can even create your own. So you have an unlimited amount of content. You can share that content out with students, or in this case, if the students are home, you can share it maybe with parents or however it may work. The students read that content, it gets sent back to you as the teacher, and then you can go in and you can see here in this kind of screenshot that I have, you can listen to them read. So it takes a lot of that pressure away that happens inside of a classroom to where a teacher is standing right next to a student and listening to them and marking errors and things like that. It takes a lot of that pressure away so a student can practice reading, share that back with the teacher can listen to it, mark up all the errors, then it's automatically going to calculate the words correct per minute, a breakdown of the types of errors and all those sorts of things that you'll have access to. And then the nice thing from there is for each student that you do this with, you're going to be able to track progress over time. So think about a student at the beginning of the school year and they're reading and they're using Fluency Tutor, maybe they need some work, and then you listen to them towards the end of the school year after you've been working with them throughout the year, and you'll be able to not only see with a graph the difference, but you'll be able to hear the difference, which is really nice if you're working with students and having parent-teacher conferences and things like that as well. So that's the idea of what Fluency Tutor is being able to share reading passages, let students practice reading, for you to be able to listen to that, give them feedback, and then show that progress over time. That's the idea behind Fluency Tutor. And then last but not least is WriteQ. So we've covered Read and Write, which helps with reading and writing in general. It's more on the student side of things. We've looked at Equatio, which is how we can get students to create and respond with math and get teachers to create engaging math content. Looked at Fluency Tutor, that's going to help with reading fluency. And then last, I've got WriteQ that we'll take a peek at. And the idea with WriteQ is that it makes it really easy to assess student documents. So here, for example, a student has typed in a Google document. They could have also typed in a Word document because we have a Word add-in that is very similar. The teacher goes through, WriteQ will automatically spot errors. It has built-in rubrics, or you can create your own rubrics. And it makes a really easy way, similar to Fluency Tutor with reading, makes a really easy way to assess writing, even really long pieces of writing, and give that student feedback and track progress over time. So here you can see a real simple example. I'll show this one again later. It's the document my daughter typed that I can use it. She typed for me so that I could use it during demos. Here you see we can go through it. It'll mark any errors that she has, and it gives me a place to give her some nice feedback. And over time, there's a nice dashboard then that the teacher is going to have. So once they score several of these or assess several of these writing pieces, you're going to be able to see that student's progress over time. You can even see how they compare on from a national average perspective. So you can know if they're really on target, their average maybe for their grade level in the 50th percentile, or if they're above average or need some help in those kind of things. So a large amount of data on the back end that the teacher would then have access to see. So these are all just the basics, quick overview without me going into a demo that I wanted you guys to see from a systems approach. Here's how you have the pieces in that you can help those diverse students when they're at home. You can track progress in writing when students are in the classroom or at home. You can track students' reading progress when they're in classroom or at home. These are the things that need to be in place from a systems approach, regardless of what the scenario looks like whenever we get back into school, at least in North America, for the new school year. So that is that's the basics there. Jody, hopefully that covered any kind of color you can add to that. It would be welcome. And then also, if you want to kick us off to get into, I'll show a couple of things live now. We'll cross our fingers that everything goes smoothly, and I'll try to show a few things for remote learning.
Yeah, very good. I just wanted to point out that as we talked about the systems approach there, you going through each one of those awesome tools that we have in our products, that they not only have benefits just for the students, but also for the teachers, administrators, and lo and behold, benefits for parents as well. And so it's just important to know that that broadens beyond just as Jason talked about in the very beginning when we look at remote learning. And you know, throughout CARES Act, they reference remote learning as a home learning. What we know has happened when the schools actually closed their doors and shut down and said, okay, kids have to learn at home. But I kind of want to talk a little bit about how many times these titles for this type of learning tend to kind of become synonymous. And so we see this in many cases being defined or referenced as digital learning, e-learning, distance learning. And so as Jason talked about with our systematic approach, the concept is that we have these things in place regardless of where the student is learning. And so remote learning can be digital and it might be paper and pencil. There may be times that I know I've seen in districts in my territories that I work with and with my own kids, where districts and schools have offered opportunities for kids to come and pick up learner packets of papers and dittos and worksheets and things that students are expected to work on. Those things can be put into a digital learning environment, and then they become a type of e-learning. If they're learning at home or away from school, that's our remote learning. So just understand that as we're going through and talking about these different elements, they're a bit synonymous, but then there's some differentials for them. But the biggest piece that I wanted to point out here when we talk about remote learning in and of itself is that the tools, as Jason mentioned in the beginning, are web-based, so they're accessible to learners regardless of where they are. So really kind of an anywhere learning, whether they're in a face-to-face setting and schools fire up and we're all back in our new norm, so to speak, in the fall, or whether our students are at home learning in the homes as they were at the close of this school year. The pieces that Jason showed you and is going to continue to show you in the demo moving forward all speak to that systematic approach of how we're going to provide this instruction, expect the feedback from our learners, which was super important as he showed you with Equatio, because we not only are expecting, especially in math, to see the answer of what the formula is or the question is the teacher is asking, but most importantly for math, how did you derive at that answer? And so it gives students a way to be able to actually show their work. And so I think that he's going to show us a demonstration of how we can actually apply these principles in our systematic approach related to remote learning.
Great, thanks so much, Jody, for adding to that. So yeah, I think I'll start with just an example workflow and then show you what that may look like. And kudos to my colleague Kathleen. She did a webinar showing how to use PDFs with read and write for kind of remote learning scenarios a few weeks ago. So she let me borrow her slide on this one. But here's a pretty common workflow for what you would see when it comes to remote learning. And I want to talk a bit about how we can take this and use it in if you have paper-based materials as well. So the idea is we have an assignment in a digital form, and well, these are off. There we go. And so the student is going to complete their assignment. The student then submits their work. The teacher reviews the work, and the teacher gives a grade, feedback, and the returns it to students. So this is kind of the way that, in general, we see things working, right? The teacher has maybe it's a worksheet, but somehow they have it online, or they have an online activity. They share it with the student. The student has to go and work on it. They share it. Teacher gets a notification that it's been shared with them. They go check it out, give the student a grade, and send it back. So that's great. But what happens if we have worksheets? Like, what happens if you're in a math class, or what happens if you're in any other class and you've been using worksheets? Well, how do you turn that into a digital form that you can then share with students? And so I'll give you an idea on how you can do that here. What I'm going to show you is the Texthelp PDF Reader. Now, Jody and I will add some resources to the end of the slide deck so that when you get it, you'll see those and be able to click through it and click on those resources. I'm sure Kira's going to help us out with that as well, but I'll make sure you get a link to the Texthelp PDF Reader. It's important to understand that the Texthelp PDF Reader really is part of Read and Write. So when I showed you Read and Write earlier, this is basically just Read and Write inside of a PDF reader so that you can go and view PDFs and use the annotation tools and the text-to-speech, and there's some annotation tools and stuff like that as well. So what I want to walk you through is getting a worksheet that you have that's a piece of paper. How do we turn that into a PDF that's accessible that then kids can go and use tools like Read and Write with and submit it? I wanted to mention here really quick as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So PDFs, not all PDFs are created equally. There are pictures that you could save as a PDF, but when you open them up, even though it opens as a PDF file, it's really still just a picture. So if you see the picture on the left, Kathleen is trying to highlight some text. And when she does that, it ends up highlighting everything. It highlights the whole sheet, right? It's because that's a picture. And so the computer doesn't know there are any text there. It doesn't know the difference between a picture of a flower and a picture of a piece of paper, right? It just sees it as a picture. So because of that, we don't know there's any text there. We can't highlight text. We can't listen to text read aloud. We can't do any of that kind of stuff. Now, on the other hand, on the right, there is a picture of what we would call more of an accessible PDF. Accessible may be the wrong word, but at least it's the text is accessible to where you can grab it. And you can see here that she's able to select text, and when she selects it, then you'd be able to use tools like highlighters and text-to-speech and all those sort of things. So often what will happen is if you do have a worksheet and you want your students to go and be able to use tools with it, well, if you take a picture of it and send it out, that may not actually open it up to where they can do much with it. So you'll need to consider that. One thing that Texthelp uses to help with this, I see she's added some little graphics in there, very clever. One thing that we have to help with this is called SnapReader. Now, you'll be able to check out SnapReader and get the gist of it. It's very simple. We have videos on it. I've even included the texthelp.com/SnapReader at the bottom. You'll also get this in a follow-up email to where you'll see that. But the idea behind SnapReader is if you're dealing with PDFs or if you're dealing with worksheets and they're images, and you want to make them to where you can select text and interact with them and all those kind of things. Texthelp does make something called SnapReader. You can try it absolutely free, but that'll allow you to snap pictures of documents or worksheets, drop them into a folder. It will do what we call OCR it. It means optical character recognition. Not to nerd out too much on you guys, but basically that just allows us to see that there's actually text there. Then we can do things like use read and write with it. So I'm going to show you a couple of, I'll just show you an example here. And if I go to this subject verb agreement tab that I have open, so this was just it is what you would think. It was probably a Word document or something like that to start with. Then we saved it as a PDF. Now, if you have a Word document or a Google Doc and it's already editable text, if you save it as a PDF, well, then it's going to be okay. You don't need to take a picture of it and run it through SnapReader or anything like that. What happens often is we use these fancy copy machines at schools that will allow you to make a copy of a 30-page pamphlet or something, and then it emails you a copy of that. And when you open it up as a PDF, well, it really just took a picture of each page. And so often that happens and you get there and you can't select text or anything. But here you can see I'm able to go in and select text and do all those. But because I have read and write installed, it comes with something for PDFs as well. And when I open this PDF, there's a little Google Drive integration, and this will work on Windows as well. So if you use Office 365, that's no problem. But whenever I open it up, I basically instructed it to open up with Texthelp's PDF Reader. And now that I do that, I can do things like listen to text read aloud. So if I went to click to speak, I could click. Of course, I have earbuds on, so you guys aren't going to be able to hear that, but hopefully that you saw that it was highlighting the text, which as it was highlighting, it was reading it out loud, and you can change the voice and all that sort of stuff while you're doing it. And then you can use, basically what I'm showing here that's nice is you can use the annotation tools. I'm just going to turn click to speak off. In the PDF Reader, I can highlight words and look at the dictionary and the picture dictionary. There's the text-to-speech pieces. I can highlight text, all those sort of things I can do inside of a PDF. I think the most useful tools for remote learning, however, are going to be the annotation tools. So here we have things like for each sentence, draw a box around the subject, underline or highlight the verb, rewrite the sentence. So I could do things like I could go freehand drawing and I can choose my line color and everything, but if I wanted to highlight or if I wanted to draw a picture, for example, or draw a line under runs, isn't really the correct form, but that's okay, I can do that. So you see I've made an annotation there. If I wanted to draw a box, I can get my shapes. The shapes, I can again choose the line color, the fill color, the thickness. I can do a line or square or whatever I may want. So here I could say the football players, draw a line around that. And if I wanted then to retype this separately, all I would have to do is go and grab the typewriter tool, click, and I can adjust the font size and everything as well, but I could say the football players run 5 miles a day. We can expand that out and do all sorts of things and hit OK. And now I have that done, right? That's pretty easy for me to do, all using these digital tools. And now when I'm done and I share it back with the teacher is going to see all these and know that it came from that particular student. A couple ways you can do that as far as the sharing goes. You can just share it normally, through Google Drive or Office 365. If you use Google Classroom, there's Google Classroom integration with the PDF Reader. All you have to do is click on it as a teacher, choose the class and the students in that class or the students in that class you want to share it with. You share it, all the students will see it pop up. They can go to Classroom, open it, annotate it, turn it back in, teacher gets notification, and it works just like you would expect it to work with Google Classroom. So a really nice integration there. So that's just something I wanted to mention. I think with Read and Write, there are loads of tools, but if I'm thinking remote learning and Read and Write, being able to take a worksheet, turn it into a digital accessible file, sharing that through Google Classroom or through some other means with students, letting students respond to that with digital tools, and then sharing that back with the teacher so that they can grade it and give them feedback, I think is it's just a very cool kind of feature set that you can take advantage of pretty quick. Jody, if there's anything to add there, I'm just going to go to the next piece for remote learning. Which would be for Equatio. So on Equatio, I want to show a couple of different things here on Equatio, and then obviously if you guys have questions, be sure to pop them in the question box. So Equatio has a few pieces to it, right? So Equatio works in Google Docs, it works in slides, it works in forms, it works in Word. There's what we call a desktop version that you can install on Windows or Mac and use it in Microsoft Word for there, or you can use the Chrome extension. But there is an equally cool place called MathSpace, and it works in Chrome, but it'll also work in iPad as well. And MathSpace is basically just it's like a whiteboard area for you to create really engaging math activities and share that with students. So the idea of what MathSpace is, it's what we call a web app. So it's basically a website you go to. It's going to work in different browsers. It's going to work on iPads. Has a nice workspace where you can actually work out things like geometry problems and things like that. It's got all those forms of input that I already told you about. You can type or speak math. You can draw shapes, all those sort of things. And then the cool piece is, especially when you're thinking remote learning, it's got that classroom integration or just a share integration if you don't use Classroom, where you can share that out with a link or through Classroom with students. They can open it up, respond to the math spaces with their own math, turn that back in, and allows you to give them feedback and keep track of kind of over time all the activities that you're sharing and the work they're turning in and all those sort of things. So a quick demo of that, you can just see a little animation here in the screen of what MathSpace looks like, but I'm going to escape out of here, go over to MathSpace. So MathSpace is, it's got its own dashboard area. So if I go to my MathSpace dashboard, which I can get to from the extension, or I can get there just by going to equatio.texthelp.com and signing in, here are all the math spaces I've created. So here you see I've got a little Pythagorean theorem stuff going on. I've got a number line going on, a fraction bar going on. I was doing some stuff with physics down here with kind of showing the car going up an incline. I want to share this one with you just to show, I thought it was something cool that my colleague Louis created. So Louis's son is in first grade, I believe, and he was sent home a worksheet to do, right? And so he's got to like do the worksheet and take a picture of it and turn it back in and all those sort of things. So Louis was showing how easy it is that you could take a worksheet and turn it in to an interactive math space that students could really use and draw with. So the math space, again, it's like Google Slides or PowerPoint, right? Imagine it being kind of like each slide you can draw on and manipulate with math symbols. So here on the first one is just a picture of the worksheet. And then if I go down to part 2, well, this is actually question number 1 on the worksheet that he's turned into a space. So he's saying Jan read 10 books in November and 20 books in December. How many books did she read? So I could go through and grab a book and drag over however many books I wanted to and then count those up and provide an answer. And when I'm done, I would then just be able to turn that back into my teacher. Now, I'm showing you a really basic example here. This is first grade math. I'm a little nervous to get into too high level of math just for all of our sanity. You probably wouldn't want to see that. But I hope you can easily see that you can go in and create these math spaces and do really engaging stuff with it. Now, there are shapes we can choose here. You can see if I wanted to add the circle or rectangle, but there are dozens of shapes. If I said fraction bar, you can see there are fraction bars. So you can create an unlimited amount of activities, share those with students for them to work on and turn it back in. When they turn it back in, you can just go right into your math space or your dashboard, see they turn it in, give them feedback that they'll receive, and that way they can get feedback for you. It's just like turning in worksheets and handing it back in. It's much more engaging and much more efficient if you're in a remote learning environment for that. So hopefully this makes sense to you guys. And the nice thing is we've added this not long ago, is you can just make a copy of Math Spaces. So if you have a teacher, or I've got Louis, that's a product manager for Equatio that makes all kinds of exciting Math Spaces, we can easily make a copy of that, share it with other teachers so that they can add it to their dashboard. So if you have a few teachers in the system that want to create some Math Spaces, they can really easily share it with others, as opposed to everybody having to create things from scratch. So that's Equatio for remote learning. I think MathSpace is a way to go there, a real easy way to do that. Fluency Tutor, I'm going to kind of go through this with a few slides, just to get the point across. I've basically already talked about what Fluency Tutor is before. It's a way to help with reading fluency. So the question I would ask is, how do we teach reading fluency right now? And so reading fluency, or the idea behind fluency, it's the ability to read quickly, but not too quickly, obviously, and accurately, so you pronounce the words right, and with the right amount of expression whenever you're reading. And that's what reading fluency is. So how do we teach children to read fluency now? This hasn't changed in 20 years or more, probably, that I'm aware of. And the way that you do that is you're one-on-one with a student, and you hand a student a passage to read, usually on a piece of paper. And as the teacher, I have the same copy of that. I ask the student to start reading. I start a timer for 1 minute. And every time a student makes an error, I mark it in a certain way to say, oh, that was a hesitation, or that was a mispronunciation. And after they've read for 1 minute, I can then tell them to stop. And I can check the errors they made, and I get the words correct per minute. And words correct per minute is the official measure, I guess you would say, of fluency. Because if you know what grade a student is, and you know their words correct per minute, well, then you can place them in like the 50th percentile or 10th percentile. You can know if they need work, and based on the types of errors that they've made, whether it be mispronunciation, hesitations, omissions, you can then know the type of instruction to give them. So as you can imagine, that is really difficult to do if students are home and unless you want to hop in and do a Zoom call somehow with each of them. That's going to be really difficult to do in a remote environment. Even if you're not in a remote environment, this is not the most comfortable experience for the teacher or the student to be across from each other marking errors. It's kind of a nerve-wracking thing for a lot of students. So Fluency Tutor helps with that. And the way that works is Fluency Tutor contains about 500 reading passages, or you can create your own, or you can go to a news article and make your own from a news article. So there's really an unlimited amount of reading passages that you can choose from or create. You then share that reading passage with a student. The student opens up the reading passages, and if you allow it, there are some support tools in there that they can use to look up words in the dictionary and listen to words be read aloud. The student then practices reading, and when they're ready, they submit that back to you as the teacher. You're going to get a notification that the student has finished with a reading. You go in and listen to it, mark the errors, and it will automatically create those words correct per minute averages for you that you can look at and view progress over time. So you're going to have that in the Fluency Tutor dashboard, and then it's kind of that cycle starts all over again. Did the student really knock it out of the park? If so, well, let's give them some more advanced content. Is the student really struggling? Well, okay, well, let's go down maybe a few Lexile levels and share it back with them. So the passages, for example, have Lexile levels. They have comprehension questions, those sort of things as well. So this is a real easy way for you to do this remotely. Just some screenshots so you see what happens. Here's a list. If you're a teacher, you can go to where it says share a passage, and you can from there choose from the hundreds of passages that we have. You can see, you can look by reading age or Lexile level. Once you share that with them, the student sees something like this. So when they're ready, and they can use text to speech and things like that to listen to it. But when they're ready, they hit the record button. After they do that, that gets shared back with the teacher. And that goes back to what I showed you earlier, to where you can go and mark the errors and see progress over time and all those sort of things. So that's Fluency Tutor, one of the best tools. That and Equatio, really, when I'm thinking about it, just really two of the best tools we have for remote learning. I can say the usage in general of these products are through the roof since all the at-home kind of stuff started a couple of months ago now. So now I'm sure that I'm really flying through this. I apologize. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I promise I'll be around to answer questions or send additional resources afterwards. So now let's take a quick look at RIQ. Now, RIQ is, there's two kind of sides to RIQ. There's a teacher experience and a student experience. And I really want to focus on the teacher experience because, you know, I really think it's interesting to see how are students practicing writing and getting feedback, because that's really the most important piece, is for students to get the feedback from teachers to tell them kind of that holistic feedback of what do they need to work on. So RIQ is really good at giving teachers an easy way to remotely and quickly assess information, writing that is, and then share that back with students so that they can review it and go from there. Now, there is also something I'm not going to have really time for today, but there is a student side of RIQ as well. And basically, when you install RIQ or when it gets deployed, you choose if you're a student or if you're a teacher. The student side is all about encouraging students to write, because if you want students to write better, they need to write more. And that is really the key. So if you think about a Fitbit or one of the Apple Watches that has a fitness tracker, you know how it really encourages you to get more steps at the end of the hour, where it celebrates when you get your 10,000 steps or those sort of things. RIQ for students, the student experience side of RIQ, that's what it does. It encourages students to write more. It gives them awards if they write about certain content or a certain amount of words. It tracks all that up for them so they can see their own writing progress. So that's the student side of things. But the teacher side of things is all about quickly and accurately assessing a piece of writing and then giving that feedback to students and then seeing that over time. So I can just show you this real quick. I've got just gonna go to this dream or reality doc that my daughter, she typed this up for me over a year ago, and she always makes sure that I tell anyone that I'm showing this to that the errors in here were made on purpose for my demonstration purposes. So I want to make sure I get that out of the way so she's not angry with me. But RIQ is the little tab over here to the right. Excuse me. And if I want to assess a document, all I really have to do is I'll toggle it on. And when I open it up, I see that at the time of this writing, Chloe, my daughter, was in grade 5, and this is a narrative writing. It knows she's in grade 5 because I said I was a grade 5 teacher. I could always change that to any other grade if I want to, if I'm working with multiple grades. Narrative is just the type, it's the genre, but I can change that as well. And it automatically picks up the spelling errors and the punctuation errors and the grammar errors. It gives me the word count. It gives me the vocabulary age, which is interesting because you should see a student's vocabulary maturity go up through the course of the year and definitely through the course of their journey as a student. And then I also find it real interesting that it's time on task. How much time did a student really spend writing? If you're in the classroom, you can kind of get an idea of this, right? Because you can go around the desk and you kind of have an idea how much students are working on it. If they're home working on this, sometimes at midnight or sometimes in the morning or in the middle of the day, like how do you know how much time they spent on it? So it's nice to be able to track how much time they spent writing. So I can continue from here onto a rubric. Now there are built-in rubrics that come with RIQ. Here you see, based on grade 5 narrative, we have one built in. It asks for the focus, organization, narrative techniques, language. These are rubrics that come with RIQ. They're free. We worked with a researcher at the time out of the University of Central Florida to get these created. So you can go through and, for example, if I wanted to see what grade level was, I can expand it. Tells me what that is. I can agree with that or move it to a different level if I'd like. Just going to fly through these so you get the idea. I'll say that's approaching grade level, and I'll say language is above grade level. And I'll go to continue. And here is where I can go and enter in some personalized feedback. You can see all the errors and types of errors. You can see a breakdown of the rubric and the different pieces of the rubric and where they scored on there. So I can save this, and the student can get the feedback in one of two ways. One, I can insert this as a graphic at the top of the paper so that the next time a student comes in, they'll see the feedback right there. My written feedback, all the rubric score, the detailed feedback, all that. Or two, if they have RIQ installed, they will get a notification that says, hey, the teacher has provided feedback, and they can go in and see the breakdown of the rubric and all those sort of things. You can even create your own rubrics with RIQ as well. So if you have rubrics that your school or your grade or your district or your state already uses, you can easily go in and create those to start with so that they're there, and you can even share those with other teachers. So once they're created once, all the other teachers don't have to go and do the same thing. So that is the basics of on the teacher side of things. I can go through and quickly, easily score this document, then go to the next one and the next one and the next one. The cool thing is, from a teacher perspective, I can then go and take a look at my classrooms. So if I go to the RightQ dashboard, I can now go in and take a look at, okay, I've got English Language Art 1 or 2 or Intro to Writing. I can see my class overview, but then I can go into my class, see every student in my class and the averages of how they've been doing. Then I can go in and look at that individual student. I can see their average RightQ score, which is a score that basically takes a lot of things like that time on task and maturity and all that stuff and kind of combines it into one nice number. I can see that RightQ score over time. I can see their rubric score average. I can see every document that they've ever written and that I've assessed, and I can see how they compare with national norms. So much data that I can track. And if that's not enough, we even have an admin version of this that will be released in the very, very near future, like next week-ish, to where an administrator could even go in from here and view this at the school level or the whole district level, or even at the grade level if you want to see how our 5th grade students do it and all those sort of things. So a way for to really track that progress throughout a school or a district over time. So this is a really good way to see if students are writing, be able to give them feedback and be able to track their progress over time, whether they are in the classroom or out of the classroom. It is just super handy for these remote learning environments. So Jody, I have given a mouthful. If you can jump in, if anything to add, please do. If not, I know we've got about 10 minutes here for me to fly through a few things on diverse learners, but anything you'd like to highlight here?
Yeah, absolutely. Just that tie-in again of that systematic approach of looking at the center of this approach of putting out supports for students who are in the margins, so to speak, those who, and you know, I listed them previously. We could go back and reference each one of those subcategorical groups, but just knowing that with our home learning environment and our unique learning environment, and especially with the time that our students have been out of the face-to-face instruction, that moving forward, we're going to be facing a multitude of learner differences and diversities in our learners that we need to have that systematic plan for. So not just students with disabilities specifically, or students with dyslexia, naming all those unique groups, but really looking at, again, that systematic approach of planning for these supports to be in place for all learners. And so that's the big benefit that you're seeing with the tools that Jason's seeing, that benefit for the students themselves, followed on by the teachers and then the administrators. And so, Jason, what do you have to show us here for these diverse learners specifically?
So a couple of things. One, I'm sure people are tired of listening to me, so I've tried to cut some of these a bit short, but I do at least want to go in and show a few things. And I really kind of imagine a better support to start with than Read and Write, because Read and Write does so much. I mean, we joke about it being the Swiss Army knife of literacy supports, because there are just so many little tools that you can pull in and out based on the student individual needs. So I love showing this. If you guys have been in Texthelp webinars before, you've probably seen it. We've had it around for a couple of years now, but I just think it speaks volumes for what Read and Write can do. So this is a student, and you know, the assignment was a writing assignment, and this is what the student was able to write, and you know, in a given time period. But then just a few days later, when given tools like Read and Write, so this is 2 days later, same exact student, middle school student, I believe in the state of Illinois. If I can get it to pop up here. So, I mean, it is obvious that this student, that the barrier here was the student writing, and it wasn't the student knowing or having the ability to tell a story, but it really was the whole, the act of writing in this case, if this is just a couple of days later. So tools like Read and Write can help, and you know, the question is, well, how do they help? And it's really just the ways that are built in. So text to speech is pretty basic, right? It reads text out loud. But imagine from a writing scenario that I write something, I think I know what I've written, but then I use text to speech to hear it read back. Well, that simple act will tell me if that sounds right or not. If it doesn't, then I know I need to go and make some edits to that. Dictation, if I really struggle with writing, whether it be with a pen or whether it be with a keyboard, I can speak, right? I can dictate my I can dictate whatever it is that I'm going to write. I've noticed my daughter does this often. It really is funny, because I would do this for text messages maybe, but my daughter, for a complete paper, she'll go and turn on, she discovered dictation tools, and so she'll go and actually write the majority of her paper, like say period, new line, all that kind of stuff with dictation. Prediction is a very similar thing. Word prediction in Read and Write is built in. So again, you're so used to using it. I always wondered, we've done some early studies and we know that kids that use, I should say, struggling writers that use word prediction write twice as much and make 0 spelling errors. So I always find it fascinating that we use word prediction every day when we're sending text messages or instant messages, but when it comes to writing, we never use it. So that's why we have word prediction built into places like Google Doc and Microsoft Word that you can use. Writing tools, talking dictionaries, editing tools, study tools, all these kind of things are built in to read and write, and using those tools are what allows students like the one that I just showed to do those sort of things. So let me just pop out of here real quick. I'm going to go into a Google Doc. I want to show you the super basics here. And obviously, if you guys have questions, you can let me know. But I've got, if I can get rid of the outline view there. So I've got a Google Doc open. I have my read and write toolbar. If it's closed, you'll just see a little tab sticking out, the read and write toolbar. This is real interesting as well because we've had districts deploy read and write, and often the challenge has been letting students know that it's there. Well, this discoverability piece has been really useful. That's the little puzzle piece is not something that any student would really consider being in the way. Just hangs there in an extra tab. They click on it, the tab itself will go away to not take up any more screen space. Push the document down a bit, and now you have access to this toolbar, and it contains all the tools that I just talked about, right? So if I wanted to hit the play button, you probably can't hear that again, but it's using the voice Ava. There are dozens of voices. You can change the voice to Spanish if you have Spanish text. It'll do you can speed it up, slow it down. Obviously, you can adjust the volume and all those sort of things, but it'll read the sentence out loud, and you can have it automatically go to the next sentence, but it does that alternate highlighting. I always go back to say, it goes back to if you're teaching students to read. We have a neighbor, she's a couple years old, and anytime her mother's reading to her, she points at each word as she reads it out loud, right? It's the same thing. You see the word, you hear the word, you get that audible feedback. So it's a real nice tool whenever for struggling learners, for sure, to use on the text-to-speech tool, and then being able to adjust that as needed is nice. But also, if I'm not sure what a word is, I can highlight it. There's a dictionary, there's a picture dictionary, shows the different forms of it. So lots of different support tools there. I talked about word prediction earlier. If I wanted to actually write in this document and I turn on word prediction, I can type the letter T. Obviously that changed to letters only with a capital T. I can then go and type something like FO. Well, it's interesting because FO, the English language is hard. Like, how would one know that F and PH make the same sound? But you can see here, if I type FO, I have phone. I can hover over it. It'll say it out loud so I can hear it. If I have the picture dictionary open, it would even show me a picture of it at the same time. So lots of stuff that we can do there. Just turn that off. The dictation piece that I mentioned, we call it talk and type. You turn it on, you can speak. As you speak, it'll type. Have a translator as well. So you can turn the translator on, hover over words. So if I say earth, probably set to Spanish, I am. So now you can see I can go and hover over this, hit the play button, and it'll actually read it out loud with the Spanish voice so that you can hear the actual Spanish pronunciation of it. So that's going to be helpful for your English language learners that speak English, but some of those content-specific words they could use some help with. You have all your highlighting tools and things like that as well, where you can go and highlight, create vocabulary lists. You can even, I'm showing you this inside of a Google document, but it is just as powerful on a website. So if you're on a website, you can open these tools up as well, highlight content, collect the highlights into a Google Doc and those sort of things as well. So those are just a lot of the ways that Read and Write can support diverse learners, from reading, writing, research, productivity, all those perspectives. Read and Write is a very powerful tool. And then the other piece that I would just mention quickly is Equatio, and I'll just go right into showing it. You saw Equatio in MathSpace, but it's important to know that if I just go to my little empty math document here, that if you just use the Equatio extension, similar to Read and Write, instead of being at the top of the page, Equatio is at the bottom of the page. So I can click on things like the equation editor and start typing 4x squared. So I just typed SQ OV for over 3 pi, for example. Okay, so I did that in about 6 seconds with one finger. Trying to create that kind of math in a document digitally is historically very difficult to do, and Equatio just makes it so easy to do those sort of things. I could even type QUA. Sorry, let me get back in here. So I type QUA and there's a quadratic formula. Try typing that thing out in Google Docs and see how long that takes you. But here it's just super simple to add those. We have chemistry things as well. Some of the newest stuff that we have in here, for example, are STEM tools. There's a periodic table. I can go and click on any of the the elements on the periodic table, learn about them, and then this is a very simple example because it's only going to be an H. But if I wanted to add it, you'll see it adds H into the equation editor, so you can start building different molecules and things like that as well. So it just makes it so easy to create math and chemistry, and we're adding loads of physics formulas in here as well. This is me with prediction, but I can easily do it with handwriting. I can do it with dictation like I talked about before. There's even a Desmos integration to where if I wanted to, I could open up the editor and do something like y equals mx. Is that right? Y equals mx plus b. I could add sliders. So this shows you how like the slope of a line can vary. And I can take that and insert that after I create my formulas and graphs. I can insert that right into a Google document that I can then turn back into the teacher. And again, I'm showing you this inside of Google Docs, but it's going to work in slides. You know, you can share via Classroom through Docs. So many different ways you can use this. It's going to be great for the teacher to create the content. It's going to be great for the student to be able to respond to the content. So that's read and write, and that's Equatio. I should also mention all the stuff we do in Equatio is accessible. So if I go in and insert these formulas, they're going to have alt text behind it. It's going to be accessible with screen readers. It's keyboard accessible. You're going to be able to use text to speech with read and write with it. So a lot of different ways, again, that you can that diverse students can benefit from this. So guys, I am aware of time. I know that you can't tell that since I'm still talking. So I just want to go in and go to this questions real quick. Kira, are there any questions that popped up that we can answer real quick? And then I think from there, everyone will get a copy of this slide deck, right, and the webinar so that they can review it, because I know that I flew through these things.
Yep, absolutely. We will be sending out the recording as well as a link to the slides for you guys, so you can go through this again. I know it was a lot to digest in just an hour, but we did have a couple of really great questions that came through. If you guys will bear with us for just a few more minutes, that we can cover these. So the first question is for you, Jody. Just looking towards the future and making sure my school is as prepared as possible for remote and blended learning in the long term, would it be possible to use the CARES funding for multi-year licensing of any of these products?
Of course, the actual answer for that, you would want to speak with your district's budgetary managers and get the authority from them. But as I stated in the beginning of the webinar, the CARES Act funding itself has an expense deadline of 2022. So that takes us basically through a couple of school years there. And so, you know, there are federal legalities and parameters around that. So you certainly want to speak with your district who makes those decisions, because they're the ones who are monitored in that area. But according to the CARES Act, funding, the expenses go through 2022, of September 30th, 2022.
Perfect. Thanks, Jody. Our next question is for Jason. So this is saying that we've already seen some students experiencing a bit of a COVID slide, and now that we're moving into a time where we can expect to see some students experiencing a summer slide on top of that, are there any products that you've outlined today that students can use over the summer on their own to help avoid any further slide over the summer break?
Definitely. Now, some of it would be, you know, some of it could require a little bit of upfront work from the teacher, and that to kind of give some assignments. I was talking with Mark, my colleague Mark. He looks over a lot of the RIQ related stuff, and he was talking about just send out like a prompt a week kind of thing, and then use RIQ to write. And if that happens, well, then whenever school starts back, you're going to be able to see that writing progress of the student over the summer and their time they actually spend on task and things like that. I think Fluency Tutor is excellent. One thing I didn't get to show in Fluency Tutor is the ability, there's a Fluency Tutor extension, I should say, that you can install as well. So if the student has a Fluency Tutor extension, they can go out on the web and find some content that they think is interesting, click on the Fluency Tutor extension, and it'll actually create a Fluency Tutor passage for them that they can practice reading and then submit to their teacher over the summer. And the teacher doesn't have to do anything in that particular example. So there are several ways. Same way you could do a thing kind of like Louis did, load a worksheet in, create an activity on MathSpace and share that around. and students would be able, again, to go and do that over the summer as well. So I think there are a lot of ways to do it. Some of it would require a little bit of upfront work on the teacher to get set up. And then again, with things like Fluency Tutor, there's zero work required on the educator's end, and the students can just go from there and start using it themselves.
Perfect, thanks. This next question is also again for you. So just asking if any of these tools will work within LMSs that these schools use within their districts, such as Canvas or Schoology.
Definitely. Equatio has add-ins for Canvas and Schoology. Read and Write, actually, Read and Write's nice because it's just that floating toolbar. So for the majority of LMSs, like Schoology, like Canvas, you're just going to be able to use Read and Write in it already. You don't need a special add-in. It'll just work. Schoology, we did do a custom integration for the PDF reader. So if you wanted to do the thing I showed earlier with PDFs, but you don't use Classroom, if you use Schoology, well, then you can do a similar thing with an integration there with the PDF reader. And again, Equatio is tied into loads of LMSs, so you'd be able to use it as well.
Perfect, thanks. And then our last question here is for you, Jody, again. So just wondering if there's any ability to do any sort of trial or pilot for any of these products before pursuing CARES funding for them.
Great question. I was hoping to get to interject this. I know that we've gone quickly through both the CARES funding, and there's lots of questions swirling around that, and also many, many questions about all of the products that Jason showed us. And so absolutely, we have opportunities for you to get in touch with your regional territory directors throughout the U.S. We actually have, Jason, would you mind pulling up the CARES Act funding page that we have so that they can see where they can go in and request actually on our website? Might be really helpful to kind of see at this point. We'll put this resource in the slide deck that we send out. However, this is a great place to go and get contact within our company to find out who your specific territory director is, so that they can give you the options that are available to you in your areas, as far as offering a more dedicated demo where you have an audience that's chosen, by you, or maybe it's a one-to-one where they can give a demo and overview of each one of these. Also, the opportunity for you to be able to go and get some of these tools completely for free for yourself. Read and Write and Equatio are always free for teachers, and there's some light versions of our other tools that you can go out and get, as well as, yes, certainly pilot opportunities that we offer throughout the school year in order to be able to sort of try before you buy, in a sense. However, we know it's summertime, and so that kind of limits some of the specifics of working with the students. However, your territory director would be the best one to strategize with, to get in contact. And if you have trouble navigating our page, I'm sure that if you contact either Jason or me or Kira, any of us would be happy to put you in touch directly with who's over your state and can give you that specific information that you're looking for, as well as information about the CARES Act and our products as well.
Perfect, thanks, Jody. I just added in that link to the chat box there if you would like to go to our CARES Act funding landing page as well. And I will make sure to include that in the follow-up email that we will be sending out to everybody that attended, including the link to the recording if you want to share that with any of your colleagues. But that's pretty much everything we had for today. So I just wanted to say just a huge thank you to our presenters today, Jason and Jody. You guys were just awesome. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be sending out a recap email of the webinar within the next day or two. And also, if you would like any immediate feedback from your specific sales representative, there's going to be a quick poll just at the very end of this webinar when you close out. So feel free to just answer that if you would like immediate feedback, and we'll get back with you guys as soon as possible. But just thanks again, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
See you guys. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.